Hi, welcome to another edition of the Alan Rosenberg Show. This video is going to be very different. I'm going to go into my archives. I'm going to be showing you clippings. I'm going to show you some really cool things. But I just want you to think about how rock music has changed. And this is a really good example. So I used to go to concerts in the mid to late 70s and the 80s. That was my heyday. Tickets back then, they were like $8.50. Maybe they went up to $14 like in the early 80s. You know what that'd be equivalent today? So $8.50 back in the late 70s would be equivalent to around $40 now. And $14 then is probably equivalent to about $65 now. Do you pay that kind of money for concert tickets? No. For major artists, it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So based on inflation, the inflation is out the window because the ticket should be like $60, give or take. Bands make all their money now on the road. Back then, they made most of their money from selling records, but they certainly made money on the road. I don't know how they did it, but they certainly did. But more importantly, those major artists, they used to release an album every year, or maybe every 2 years. And when you were a fan, you went to those concerts because you wanted to see the new material. You didn't want to see the same hits over and over again. Yeah, on a tour, the set list may be the same for a whole tour, but you're only going to see them maybe once, maybe twice. It was going to be the same show. But the tour was completely different than the previous tour. And now what you have, because tickets are hundreds and hundreds of dollars, even if an artist puts out a new album, you act thankful that maybe they'll play 2 or 3 new songs. Like this is some wild thing. Even though they spent the last 15 years playing the same set list. Why? Because they're charging hundreds of dollars, and the most people that go now are not really big fans anymore. They only know the classics. A little aside, I just heard that Queen is selling their catalog for over $1 billion. More than double Bruce Springsteen and even Bob Dylan's catalog. I mean, is that insane? How could Queen's catalog be anywhere near as valuable as Bob Dylan or Bruce Springsteen? But it is. It's more than double valuable. But meanwhile, I'll bet my life that 90% of Queen fans only know 10 songs. But those songs are huge. So everything to me is like out of whack. And it made me think about those times in the 70s, how courageous bands were. Because not only did they tour all the time and release new music, but when they toured, they played that new music. And the fans wanted that. And in some cases, they would do tours that were really difficult. And they would put out these concept albums. And oftentimes they would play them live before the album was even out. So the fans wouldn't even know this stuff. And they would play this giant concept album. And the fans didn't know it. And it was still an amazing experience. So this video is courageous concept album concerts from the 70s. You get that? Bands that had so much courage and believed so much in their worth that they would tour and play an album, a concept album, that the fans didn't even know. The critics would trash them for. It wasn't such a golden age. Critics always trash these bands that had all this courage. How dare they do this? But it took amazing courage, and sometimes these bands lost a ton of money doing this. So let me take my hat off, theoretically, and praise some amazing concert tours that really got trashed in the 70s, but the courage that these artists have and the fans who love them. All right, let's start with Jethro Tull. Now, Jethro Tull, and you may not really remember this, were a very theatrical band, hugely theatrical. But they really went to town. So after they peaked, let's say, in like 71 with Aqualung. And then in 72, because some people said Aqualung was a concept piece, and it really wasn't, although it had some conceptual ideas in it, they put out Thick as a Brick, which really was like a joke piece on concept albums back in 1972. But when Jethro Tull toured Thick as a Brick, they played the whole 45 minutes of Thick as a Brick. And most people, or a lot of the fans, didn't really know it. And it's really difficult music. And it was really theatrical. Unfortunately, Tull didn't record any of this stuff. And even the pictures, here's their booklet from the box set. they don't even have pictures from that amazing stage show. They just don't really exist. They're hard to find. And I have books and books, but this is what they look like. But, you know, like in the middle of their show, they would have a phone booth and they would dress and have like a rabbit jump by, or they would have like a dog in a pram. You can see that picture right there. And they were very theatrical. They would stop the show and a telephone would ring. And they got a lot of, you know, the critics trashed them for it. But If Thick as a Brick wasn't bad enough or good enough, the following year, 1973, they put out a passion play. And when they toured this, the album didn't even come out yet. And the fans didn't know what to make of it. And the opening of that show was a screen, and it was a dot, and it would get bigger and bigger, and it would take like 10 minutes for this thing, and people didn't know what was going on. And then you'd have the ballerina on the screen, and she would actually jump through the screen. And they played the whole of Passion Play, which is a really difficult listen. You know, you got to be a big Tull fan to really like it. And I mean, I do, but it's not an easy listen. Ian Anderson actually would play saxophone on that tour. And again, unfortunately, they really do not have too many pictures, but they had like a horse and the rabbit, and they played the whole damn album. And they got such bad reviews that the record company did a public relations thing that said that they're going to never tour again. They were going to retire, which of course they didn't. The next year they did War Child and more commercial Tull. But talk about courage. To go out 2 different tours, 2 different years in a row. One, Thick as a Brick in 72. 73, a completely different show for a passion play. The critics are ripping you apart, but the fans are going and still enjoying it. And here's some old magazines that I have, and I have hundreds of these. And here's a headline in, this is Circus Magazine from November of 1973. That's Uriah Heep on the cover. And there it is, Jethro Tull, 1 million fans prove the critics wrong. They were a huge band. Remember, 76, they headlined and played Shea Stadium. So, you know, Tull was a huge, huge band. And Ian Anderson, here he is on the cover of Circus in December of 75. Now that's Minstrel in the Gallery time. But basically, you know, he's fearless, man, and does what he wants to do. Gets defensive. He's not exactly buddies with the critics. But, you know, a very, very theatrical band back then, and playing those albums in its entirety. Jethro Tull. So that's them. Now, let's talk about, let's talk about the Kinks. Why not? The Kinks, a lot of people forget, but they went to RCA Records, and that's all they were doing, was doing theatrical albums and matching tours. And I didn't really love all of these, but there's Preservation Act 1, and then there's Preservation Act 2, which was a double album. And if that wasn't enough, I got the clippings there. Then they also did Kinks Present a Soap Opera, which is a little bit easier. This one's a better one, I think. A couple of real good songs on that one. And they even did Schoolboys in Disgrace, a latter-day one. So we could stick that, you know, around over there as well. So the Kinks were touring back then, and they also would do these shows. And here's Circus Magazine from August of 75, Elton John on the cover. And they had a big spread on Ray Davies' soap opera, Scours Up the Common Man. And that was a show. And there you had the singers, and, you know, they would just play the whole album and put on a show and wore wigs. And that's the Kinks doing soap opera. And if that one wasn't enough, here, I got more Kinks on here. Here's another Cream magazine. This is August of 75, probably also around soap opera. And Ray Davies assuming bouquet, and then you got some pictures there. So, you know, very theatrical shows. Mixed reviews. They weren't huge at the time, the Kinks, but, you know, Ray Davies is a real artist and didn't care. And eventually they went to Arista and did Sleepwalker and got away from that whole theatrical thing. And they got it out of their system. Perhaps nothing is bigger than The Wall, right? 1979. And Roger Waters still playing The Wall on occasion. They did eventually release this live record, which is There Anybody Out There? The Wall Live, 1980 to 81. And this is The Wall Live on that original tour. Probably the most courageous tour ever, really. Here's a book on it, and you talk about, what they did. They only played in 1980, February of 1980, Pink Floyd played 7 shows at, I believe it was the Forum in LA. They did 5 at the Nassau Coliseum in New York. That was in 1980. Then they didn't do any more. That's 12 shows in the United States in total. They did 6 at Earl's Court in London at the end of that year, like August of 80. And then they came back the following year in 81. They did 8 in Germany at the beginning of the year, like February. And then they went back to Earl's Court, did another 6. So they did not do a lot of shows for The Wall. And they lost a ton of money. Roger Waters, but, look what they did. This is a whole book on The Wall. This is a great book by Gerald Scarfe. But they talk about the show and the design and everything that went into this. And this is the drawings and the plans. I mean, I don't think any show is ever like that. Of course, it's the inflatables and the staging and what this thing cost and the projections and the airplane that would fly down and explode and the set inside the wall. I mean, beyond belief. And to only do such a relatively small amount of shows, the money that it cost. But it didn't matter. It was about the art. And I guess Roger Waters probably knew that The Wall would live on forever, and he's still towards The Wall. And obviously they made the movie and the rest. So, probably nothing bigger than The Wall. Let's talk about another one. Let's talk about Genesis. Now, Genesis, back in the day, was a very theatrical band. You're talking about like Nursery Crime. Here is Cream Magazine from 1974. Frank Zappa on the cover there. But there is Genesis. Zombie Twits Make Good. A Journey into Wormwood with Genesis. This is them live back in the day. And the Musical Box recreates this stuff. But very theatrical, and that was Foxtrot and Nursery Crime and things like that. But then, 1974, they decided to do The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And same situation when they first started touring that the album wasn't even out yet. And this is a conceptual piece. I love this album. And it has a story. And when they played this live, they played it live from the beginning and end. They actually have a live version they put out, although it's got overdubs on it, on the Archives box set. But this is what it looked like. Here is them on the cover of Circus Magazine back in 1975. There's Peter Gabriel as Rael and Genesis, Will America Swallow the Lamb? And they really didn't. It was not a overly successful tour. And in fact, I believe their very last show got canceled on that tour, if I remember right. But that's what he looked like when they were playing The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And they're dressed as the Slipper Man, which is a character from the piece. And the band would sit there and play. And, quite an extravaganza with the slideshow and things like that. Here's some more Kinks if you want to see. Here's the Kinks doing Preservation. We can go back in time. That's okay. So all these productions that the Kinks were doing. And now we're back to Genesis. So quite the production that Genesis did, and the guts to play. They were not a big band in America in any stretch. Like I said, the last show, I believe, got canceled for lousy ticket sales. But it takes a lot of guts to do what they did. They believed in the art. And then Peter Gabriel left, and they continued, of course, for Trick or the Tail. And the rest is history. What about Alice Cooper? Now, Alice Cooper, very theatrical, and did all of those crazy things, you know, with the getting his head cut off. But especially like when he went solo for Welcome to My Nightmare. That was also a massive, massive, you know, show. And a great show. And they did a live album. There's the Alice Cooper Show live album. All the props. There's the guillotine and the monster. And this is all from that live record, you know, from around that time period. And, you know, quite the difference, obviously, from when Alice Cooper was just the band, you know. And here is Alice Cooper. Some more pictures. Alice escapes from his own nightmare. And it was quite the production and took a lot of guts. And Vincent Price. So again, this is August of '75. And dancing, quite the production indeed. Alice Cooper took a lot of guts. That was actually a big record, that's for sure. So let's talk about Yes. We'll end it with Yes. So Yes was a huge band, and then they released their prog conceptual epic Tales from Topographic Oceans, an album that I really like, but I would say I got to be in the mood for it because it is not, you know, it's long. But when they played this concert, again, they played the whole album. Pretty gutsy maneuver. That's a double album. And they played that whole album to people who didn't even know it yet. And that's a long listen. You're talking 85, 90 minutes. And of course, Rick Wakeman wasn't exactly a fan of that album. And the story, he had a curry while they were playing live. He got bored and he thought the album should have been a little bit more concise. And I could kind of agree with that. But yeah, that was Yes doing that tour. Now, Rick Wakeman goes solo. And it's what he does. He does these amazing conceptual albums. Like he did, of course, Journey to the Center of the Earth. This great album, you know, and toured that. That's a Journey to the Center of the Earth. But I guess you would say Rick Wakeman's huge opus, and he pretty much almost lost everything. And a lot of people consider it to be one of the biggest, possibly the biggest failure ever in rock and roll, was when he did King Arthur. This album right there. And he did this at Wembley in London. You can think I'm making this up, but this is Rick Wakeman's rock opera on ice. He literally had a complete symphony orchestra. I'm not talking about like a little string section. He had a full symphony orchestra. And he had singers. And he had actors. And horses. And the crazy thing, it was all done on ice. So that guy on that horse was on ice skates. And they would skate around. And it's just so over the top. And it made national news. So here's a review in this was Rolling Stone magazine's Wakeman's Mythic Ice Capades. And of course he got trashed. They just destroyed him. And I was kind of like, why would you destroy him? He's putting up his own money and it's his dream and he's doing it. And he, like, did he go bankrupt or close to getting bankrupt? Luckily for us, it was finally released. And this, if you ever find this 1975 Live at the Empire Pool, King Arthur on Ice, it's awesome. I don't care what anybody says. It's my favorite Rick Wakeman album musically, and it's kind of fun in a crazy-ass way watching this thing. It's on DVD and on CD, and to me, it's a must-see because it's just like nothing you've ever seen before. But, you know, he did other ones before that, like Journey to... You ever see... There's a video also of the original Journey to the Center of the Earth, and that was what he looked like back then. And, you know, he had like a... I mean, look what he had a plane full of production people for that tour. It was a really big album. And the Cape. And he even had like a... It was pretty low budget. But he even had like a blow-up dinosaurs, you know, like an inflatable dinosaur, which was supposed to be terrifying, you know, like they were in the bottom of the earth, but, you know, not very terrifying, were they? But there's a shot of them. So there's your inflatable dinosaurs. Pretty terrifying, right? But, you know, the guts that these people had is extraordinary. And in fact, when I went to see Rick Wakeman in concert about a year ago, I have all these ads, and I brought a couple of them to see if Rick would sign them, and he wasn't out signing it. So I went to like their where they were selling merch, and I was talking to the guy, and I said I have this cool stuff, and I bought some merchandise from Rick Wakeman anyway, and I said I'd really love for him to sign it so I could frame it, because I have these things, and when I meet a rock star at a concert I go to, I'll see if they'll sign them. And he came out and he did sign it, which was so cool of him. So he signed my Journey ad and my Knights of the Round Table King Arthur ad. They're both autographed, and then I framed them. Pretty nice of Rick Wakeman. I have this framed, which was really nice. And that's what I have. I have lots of ads. So we're going to end it with some other ads. Here's the Kinks on tour. This is the actual ads from back in the day. You can see they were playing universities. And that is for Preservation, Act 1 they were touring. And then here's another ad for the Kinks Preservation. They were not selling tons of records back then, but Ray Davies and the Kinks had a dream to do these theatrical conceptual pieces. Here's the Kinks present a soap opera. And I showed you those pictures before. And here's Genesis Before the Lamb with selling England by the pound on tour for that ad. But this is the one I showed you. Here is the ad for The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And that's the actual original ad. So as they were about to tour for that album. And last but not least, some Alice Cooper. Here is Alice on tour for Welcome to My Nightmare. This is from Billboard magazine. He was playing the Sahara Tahoe. And here is Alice Cooper's ad. So I hope you kind of enjoyed this. Just a little reminder how rock and roll had guts, and it wasn't about charging incredible amounts of money to see a band live and play the same songs over and over again, because that's all that those fans know, because radio only plays those songs, and it's a cycle that feeds on itself. Versus back then in the 70's and even the 80's, where people were fans of bands and they would buy the new albums and sometimes see the tours even before the album came out, and the band would play the whole damn album and you didn't even know any of the songs. It was quite a time. But I miss those times, I got to be honest with you. So, and probably anybody who was around back then does as well. So I hope you enjoyed this video. You ain't going to see anything like this anywhere else, I know, with my collection. And I hope you did enjoy it. Courageous concept albums, concerts from the 70s. And that's about it. As always, I say, stay safe, stay healthy, be well out there. I appreciate your loyalty. I appreciate you watching my channel. And if you're new to my channel, do me a favor. I'm doing this 4 years, and I really do want my channel to grow, and I think it deserves to grow. So I would love it if you would hit subscribe and check out my other videos. There's a lot to partake of, and everything I do is my personal collection. There's no Wikipedia on here. I'm not reading anything. There's no script. It's all my passion and my love and my knowledge and my collection. You don't see any inserts of stuff that I don't own. This is everything that I have. And I think that's kind of unique out there. So hope you enjoy it. Have a wonderful night, and I will see you next time on the Alan Rosenberg Show.